Lucky to Be Here is a podcast that showcases the stories of those who took the leap to build their lives and careers across countries. They share their stories, lessons, and advice to show us what is possible and what it takes to be an international student and professional. Because there is a lot that goes into building your life abroad, one day at a time. We are more than just lucky to be here. I am your host, Dr. Analia Gomez Vidal, and I know what it takes because I have been there myself. Now I coach and mentor international graduate students and professionals navigating life and career transitions across industries and countries through my company, AGV Services LLC. Join our community to continue our conversation in between episodes and receive my career development reflections and resources through our Patreon at patreon.com/lucky to be here. Paid subscribers also have access to monthly live chats and behind the scenes updates. Welcome to Lucky to be here. I am really glad you are. I am really excited to welcome today Florencia Colella. Florencia is a financial facilitator in agri-food systems. She fosters conversations around economic issues among farmers, academics, and other public and private organizations. And she was also a Fulbright recipient to pursue graduate studies in the US, which we'll certainly discuss as part of this conversation today. Florencia, welcome to Lucky to be here.
Thank you for having me, Analia. I'm excited to be here.
So, to get us started, for anyone who's listening who may not know you yet, where are you from? Where have you been? And where are you now?
So I am originally from Argentina, which is a country in South America, for those of you who don't know. I grew up in Argentina. I lived in Argentina until I turned 31 years old, so most of my life. I am now 42, and so within these past 10 to 12 years, I've been living in the US on and off. Yeah, so that's where I was, where I've been, where I am in a nutshell.
And so I am interested in delving a little bit more in the on and off, but to get us started, what led you to move abroad?
So I was doing a specialization in Argentina, so a grad program, simple grad program. And I met a lot of international students in Buenos Aires in this program. And so I was curious about how they had made it there. And I learned that they had applied to scholarships in their home countries and that they had gotten funding to move to Buenos Aires. And I was like, well, that sounds kind of interesting. Maybe I could do that too. I had always had an interest in the US. And so I looked into programs, grad programs in the US. There was a scholarship at the time sponsored by the Argentinian government, but coordinated through Fulbright. Um, and I applied and I was lucky enough to get the scholarship and then be able to get my master's in the US.
So, what I find interesting about it is, like, in some ways, the way for you to get started with that idea for yourself was the example of other international
Yeah.
students in Buenos Aires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, without getting into too much detail, there were people from Europe, from other Latin American countries, very diverse. You've been in Buenos Aires, so you know how multicultural it is. Yeah, and so that was very exciting to be able to connect with people from all over the world in my own, country and city. So yeah, that was super interesting.
And when you started your own path, right, like you were applying for Fulbright and eventually, like, you came to the US as an international student, um, had you foreseen potentially, like, the longer trajectory of your time here?
No, I had not. I was only planning on it being a 2-year deal. And that was one of the reasons I decided to move where I moved. There were lots of different options, universities and whatnot. And I ended up connecting with a really good professor that I worked with for my master's in Michigan. And I thought Michigan was an interesting option for me coming from a more temperate climate in a Latin American country. I was like, well, maybe something really different from where I'm from
Mhm.
would be great as a challenge and as a learning opportunity. So I went with, Michigan that has really cold and long winters, and I was like, it's just going to be like a 2-year winter vacation type of thing, and then it turned into a really long thing, which, um, yeah, I was definitely not foreseeing at the time, but I've adapted to.
So we're going to spoil the rest of the movie by basically asking, it's like, what changed?
Oh, well, a lot of things, but the first thing that made me change, I would say, was I fell in love
Mhm.
with a fellow student, not in my program, in a different program, but in the same university, and he was American. We didn't end up, together after all this time, but that was my first reason for reconsidering my idea of just like going back home. Uh, yeah, then things just didn't work out the way I thought they were
Mhm.
or they would, but I kind of stuck to it,
Yeah.
for myself because I also thought it was a good career opportunity to have it to work here in the U.S. after graduating. So there were lots of cool things that I found here in the U.S. that I
Mhm.
didn't really expect I would find at the time. But
So walk me through
yeah.
what that felt like for you as an international graduate student, originally coming in thinking, well, this is going to be like a shorter term experience, and finding yourself kind of like getting acquainted with the culture, identifying these different things that kind of like gave you reasons to consider sticking through that path now.
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, it's kind of really like a confusing experience, I would
Mhm.
say, because I go back and forth. You end up not really belonging anywhere or belonging everywhere, and depending on where you are, like when I'm here in the U.S. currently, uh, I feel like what I'm doing, what am I doing here? And when I go back to Argentina, uh, there's lots of things that I love, and there's other things that I feel like I my style aligns really better with
Mhm.
how things work here in the U.S. So
Mhm.
there's different stages. There's a first stage of like just thinking everything is wonderful. There's then there's uh, realizations of, oh, actually there's lots of things here that don't really work very well. Um, and so that's interesting. I really learned a lot about this country and also my own country and my own culture through, the lens of living abroad. So yeah. Then there was the relationship experience of thinking things are one way, then finding
Mhm.
cultural gaps, also in my relationship uh, with someone from a different country. In
Mhm.
this case, he was from the U.S. Um, and so, yeah, then at the end, I ended up making a decision that for my career, uh, staying in the U.S., working in the U.S. was a good idea. And I was lucky enough uh, to meet a fellow Argentinian who decided to kind of walk this path with me. So
Mhm.
that simplified a lot of like my cultural, you know, having someone that understands where you're coming from is helpful in the day-to-day life. It's one less place where I need to adapt, where I need to, make an effort to fit. Whereas at work and like at the grocery store and wherever I go, uh, there's always a little extra energy that I need to be putting to
Mhm.
understand the world around me. So that's a little exhausting sometimes. But
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing this because I think that sometimes it gets there is this deeper layers of our experiences that really get lost in kind of like the usual expectations or ideas that someone has about what it is like to live abroad, right? And I think that sometimes one can kind of like project a certain image onto others as they see them abroad doing their thing, but there is like so much of the inner struggle that one constantly negotiates with oneself. And to your point about, like finding home in some ways in not just yourself but also in relationship with others that may or may not relate to what you're going through at each step of the way.
Mhm.
Where do you feel have been like the biggest points of kind of like clash culturally between like what you identify with most about where you come from, your culture within Argentina, and having like developed your life here in the
Mhm.
US?
um, I things that I'll say I miss
Mhm.
um, is the social life. I think I would say is the biggest one. Um, the friends and that culture of just going getting a cup of coffee after work or during lunch and talking about like your real problems. Like that's very strange. I feel about Argentinians that they'll tell you, or I will be, open to sharing about my deepest struggles or problems or joys with people that become friends eventually.
Mhm.
So, I feel like we're a lot more open
Mhm.
uh, back in Argentina than people are here. People are like a bit more structured, a bit more private here. And that, uh, I think that that's a pity, or that kind of always keeps me feeling empty from that
Yeah.
social connection that I crave.
Like I always call out the "how are you" question here in the US is kind of like a way of being polite but not really meaning it deeply. Whereas like for us it's like it's an invitation for you to like really tell us how are you.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's I would say that's the biggest one for me.
Mhm. So you mentioned earlier, like you were here on and off. So
Hmm.
could you walk us through a little bit more of what has been your reality of migration?
Yeah. So like we said, I was a scholarship recipient, a
Mhm.
Fulbright scholarship recipient. And so I came to the US at first with a J visa. Um, that J visa, since my program had been sponsored by the government of the country I am from, um, there was a condition to go back to my country for an equal period of time as the masters. So there was already the plan of being here for 2 years, then going back to Argentina at least 2 years. At the time, I thought, well, I'm just going back and I'm
Mhm.
staying there. But then when I got a job offer, I that was a point of struggle because I applied and got a job offer almost immediately after I graduated. And I really wanted to stay, uh, without, I wanted to kind of skip that gap at the time, which I hadn't thought would be a problem at first.
Mhm.
But then once I graduated and I was like in a relationship with someone here and I had a job offer, I was like, how can I, get out of that? And there are ways. I thought of like selling my house that I own back in Argentina.
Mhm.
And then there was a day where I was like, no, that's just crazy. I'm not going to do that. But I was really like considering it. And I emailed my the employer that was offering me the job, and I said, I just can't do this. And they knew, um, everything that implied, and so they said, we will wait for you, which
Mhm.
was a huge, huge deal. And so they waited, and I did my 2 years in
Yeah.
Argentina. I gained really useful experience, made lots of good connections. I had a chance to kind of like reconnect with my culture and
Mhm.
struggle with that reverse cultural shock a little, but also, that was 2 years of like experiencing that with its ups and its lows,
Mhm.
and then coming back and settling here with a more like permanent, well, permanent. I now have an H-1B visa. It's a
Mhm.
work visa and it's not permanent in nature. It's a temporary visa. They say it's dual intent,
Mhm.
so that means that eventually you can become a permanent resident. But I am now in my 8th year here and I'm still not a permanent resident. And that's another source of you know, anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I can relate, like, after over a decade being here and also not a permanent resident. I think that there is a lot of the reasons why sometimes we are so detailed in these elements of the experience being an international student and worker and holding all these different visas is because one of the expectations or maybe assumptions that a lot of people have about the experience of being an immigrant is that like you just like show up and eventually like you find a path, and it's like it's a lot more complicated than that, right? But I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you felt navigating that period of like post graduation where you had like, well, you had your future employer saying like we will wait for you, what that felt like to you, and also what it felt like to go back to Argentina, but also with this idea that you were coming back for 2 more years but not necessarily for the long run as you had thought about originally.
Well, for my time in Argentina and how I used those 2 years, I think I was effective. I was uh, I kind of knew what I wanted to get out of those 2 years, and thankfully I was able to do what I wanted. And what I mean by that is I, like I said earlier, I gained valuable experience. I made valuable connections. Um, Professionally, and also I broke up with that American boyfriend I had at the time, and I met my Argentinian now husband who agreed to come back with me, and that really changed how everything else ended up unfolding afterwards. And yeah, I was listening to your interview to Carmen Fleitas
Mhm.
yesterday, and she was talking about manifestation and all of
Mhm.
that. And I'm not necessarily a big believer in that, or I don't apply that to my everyday,
Mm.
or at least not consciously. But
Mhm.
with my husband, I really feel like I envisioned what I wanted
Mhm.
because I was coming from a really like a mixed culture relationship, which sometimes they work out great. In my case at that time it wasn't, and so
Mhm.
I kind of like, no, I need someone that just comes that grew up in the same place I did, that will understand. And I had kind of like other things that I wanted
Mhm.
from a person, and he appeared, and so we used that time, or part of those 2 years, maybe like one of those 2 years, to really get to know each other, to live
Yeah.
together for a while, and decide whether we wanted to continue maybe long distance for a little bit, and then
Mhm.
moving into getting married and all of that. So
As a side note,
yeah.
I'm curious, were you thinking about like getting in a new relationship while you were in Argentina?
Well, when I moved back to Argentina,
Yeah.
I was thinking I would stick to my boyfriend at the time, who was
Uh-huh.
American, and um, but yeah, that relationship didn't work out.
Hmm.
We both of us had our careers and we were very career oriented, and he didn't really want to, it's tough, those
Yeah.
types of situations put you in tough positions,
Hmm.
and you need to be really flexible to be able to adapt to somebody else's career path and somebody else's country, wherever they are from. And so that was too much of a stretch for him
Yeah.
to adapt to all that I was going through. And I guess I didn't want to give up my career either.
Hmm.
Um, and I had restrictions. I couldn't live in the U.S., so there were lots of restrictions, and we just couldn't adapt to that. With my now husband Christian, uh, he was more flexible. He was willing,
Hmm.
and that's just like how his life was going, and his personality.
Well, the reason why I was asking, were you planning on going, getting
Mm,
into a new relationship at the time? And part of the reason why I'm asking is because I'm also no stranger to how much of a pressure cooker the immigration and like international career dynamics really becomes for relationships. And I have
mhm,
a few examples of my own in which, there were times where I either separated and actively decided not to be open to dating anyone because I kind of like knew what the next step would be,
mhm,
or um the relationship just didn't survive like all the backs and forth and all the uncertainty and the pressures that come with navigating that. And so I was curious to hear from your perspective, like once you broke up with your American boyfriend, if like that manifestation of the now husband happened kind of like serendipitously as part of your process in Argentina.
I think it was a little bit of both.
Mhm.
You know, Breaking up with my American boyfriend made me realize that maybe, that cross-cultural thing was not a
Mhm.
good idea for me. And I was in Argentina, so it was the right time to be open. Although, yeah, the time between the two relationships was less than optimal
Mhm.
because, I um, usually you want to wait a little, and for me, it was just a few months.
Mhm.
Um, I was also older, so I was more mature to. I've done it in the past when I was younger, switching relationships quickly, and that's
Mhm.
usually a really bad idea. But as you get older, or I was, more aware of myself and what I
Mhm.
wanted in life. And I was, both myself and my husband were at an age where we were able to, still be mature about it, even though we had just met and we knew we were dealing with um, this strange situation of the
Yeah.
potential of moving abroad and a new relationship. So it worked out well, but it could have not.
Yeah, and one last question before we move forward in your journey. How did it feel in comparison having a local boyfriend versus having a non-local boyfriend who's also, like navigating this with you? I'm curious, like if you felt or what type of contrast you felt having, like two different partners throughout that journey.
Yeah, you have to go through it to really understand it.
Hmm.
Um, you highlighted that earlier. Um, and so, yeah, I never expect uh, my friends and acquaintances from here to understand what the whole immigration process entails. Um, so yeah, and there's other reasons, there's personal reasons why some people may be better able to put themselves in the shoes of someone that's going through um, all of that process. So
Hmm.
yeah, I definitely didn't feel, although, verbally my ex-boyfriend would say, he understood. He really didn't, and
Mhm.
that's not his fault, but
Yeah.
he really didn't. My husband went through the process with me, so he does know what it's all about. And I also find that I have lots of differences with my current
Mhm.
husband, like in all sorts of like arenas in life. But at least for the migration or the immigration process, he does. I would say there's also differences because I lead that process. I am the
Yeah.
one that is employed, and I am the one that finds it easier to read in English
Mhm.
and to research all of those things. And it takes, time, and you have to dig through laws and bureaucracy and stuff. And I tend to do that
Mhm.
more than my husband does. So there's
Yeah.
even differences between us, but we are in it together, and that emotionally that helped.
Yeah. There is that sense of I say a lot, like if you don't go through it yourself or like are intimately related to someone who does, it's really, really difficult to understand the many layers of it that go beyond just like checking boxes and filling out forms. And it sounds like having that being together through that process allows for you to find a teammate in there. But at the same time, there is also a lot of the pressure and responsibility that one feels as the one who's leading these processes.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, speaking of leading the processes, so like you complete your 2 years in Argentina and you have your employer waiting for you. What happens next?
So yeah, I get my H-1B visa, go to the embassy in Buenos Aires to get my passport stamped, and I travel. Um, so anyway, just to give you a quick story, I there was a conference in Vancouver that I had been preparing for. I had to present at, so I went to that conference in Vancouver and then took a flight back to Toronto, which is kind of
Mhm.
like very close to Michigan, and then took a bus. Like, so people don't realize that you come with two suitcases. Like there was the example of the car. I I need to drive a lot for my
Mhm.
job, and I didn't have a car when I started working. And I remember kind of like asking around, where can I buy a car? And people like nobody really even understood why. So the whole process, of
Mhm. Mhm.
settling. And so anyway, I took a bus, and then friends and colleagues ended up bringing me to the town where I was supposed to settle, because um, I don't live like in a big city.
Mhm.
So it took many friends and people giving me rides to even
Yeah.
make it to the town where I was meant to report for work.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then someone let me a car for a couple weeks until I was able to buy a used car of my own, of course, with no credit.
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, yeah, uh, going from two suitcases to settling in a country and in a job takes a lot of effort, and people don't
Mhm.
realize that.
So you mentioned a couple of things that I find interesting and also practical advice for people who are even thinking about these experiences, which is the first one is identifying and nurturing your community so that they can have your back at each step of the way, including the many rides to get you to your to the area where like you're meant to be settling to work. And then the other thing you mentioned, like the credit that you needed to build. Can you speak very briefly to that? Because I think that a lot of people do not really even know about this.
Yeah, so one thing is, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Mhm.
People may not understand what you're going through, but if you ask directly, uh, they will usually help.
Mhm.
And also, you know, uh, in my case, being here as a student allowed me to make friends and meet people. and open a bank account. And those things eventually do help with, again, asking for favors, or
Mhm.
at least, having some sort of like banking already set up
Mhm.
here before you move. Otherwise, it just takes time. You can do it all, but at one point or another, you're going to have to spend time doing it. But so if you are able to first do it as a student, then you open up doors for later in
Yeah,
advance.
and part of this is because the way that it works in the US is like you need to have a credit score before you can access credit card, like you before you can access loans and so on. So for example, like for buying a car or considering other purchases down the line, and you kind of like build that as you go. But like that is something that a lot of us are not aware or familiar with when we first come in. And it's one of those processes that is both very necessary to open doors and possibilities down the line, but also that take a lot of time and like
Mhm.
being methodical about it. So yeah, so I found that kind of like comment that you made something to highlight for a lot of people that might not even know when they're first coming in and they're coming, like I remember when I first came in and I just came with like bills, like cash. And I was like, well, what do I do next?
Mhm. Yeah, and one other piece of advice is like look at what bank might be better. When I came as a student, since I wasn't really thinking of staying, I opened an account at the local credit union, the university credit union,
Hmm.
actually. And that was fine for me for those 2 years. But then I found that when I actually really needed, some loans or some credit, uh, the bigger banks sometimes will be more open to uh, giving credit cards. Like I had a secured credit card, which means you don't actually get credit. You
Hmm.
deposit your money and then you borrow against your own money.
Yeah.
I had that for like the first 8 years here,
Hmm.
like a very long time. I wasn't able to get a real credit card, uh,
Hmm.
and that was because I was doing business with a credit union.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah,
consider which bank might give you the best deal.
that makes sense. And so you, after so many rides, you finally like get to the place, the destination.
Yeah,
When was that?
that was in 2018. And this is in Fremont, Michigan. So if you,
Hmm.
Michigan looks like a little hand, the lower peninsula, there's actually two, but so this is like basically in the middle of farm, farm America.
Hmm. Like rural America.
Rural America, yes.
And so what? It's been now almost 8 years.
Yeah,
What has it been like?
I like it. I like it. I like living in a smaller town. This stage of my life has really been about, building a family, and I appreciate the being from a very big city. Um, I appreciate the contrast, and so I appreciate, the nature. We live very close to a lake. There's lots of trees and woods and places to go for walks. Not that I end up finding the actual time to do it, but at least, you know, at least I have the opportunity, and my husband and daughter do take advantage of
Mhm.
going to the lake in the summer. Um, so it's nice. It is nice.
Yeah.
People are good. Again, like don't expect them to understand
Hmm.
where you're coming from, but other than that, they do have good intentions, so
Yeah.
it's all good.
And as you mentioned, like you're now three of you living in Fremont. And so in the past like 8 years, what has it been like to navigate that experience of being like settling there while being a visa holder, while also expanding your family?
Yeah, so the first thing I did was actually I left Fremont. I was only in Fremont for like 2 months or something, and then I
Hmm.
moved to bigger city, still small city, but a little more diverse,
Hmm.
and a lot closer to the lake. So that was one step. And, there were sub steps there where I went from, renting a room in a house to renting a small apartment to eventually buying our own house. Um, yeah, and doing all of the process for my husband to be able to join me, including getting married, and then doing his visa. And so then we both were able to be here together. Then the pandemic hit, so there were also the the new marriage things,
Hmm.
that come into play. When you're starting to live with your now husband,
Yeah.
whether you are in your home country or not, and being away makes it harder. And not being able to see people
Hmm.
during a global pandemic also makes it harder. So, we had a period there of, uh, you know, kind of like getting acquainted to being married and being together. Uh, there was the pandemic. There were also work struggles because
Hmm.
all of this time that one spends uh, planning all of this and executing this whole plan takes energy and takes time,
Yeah.
and that time needs to come from somewhere. The day still has 24 hours for everyone, and so uh yeah, many times I was, not fulfilling my job duties as
Hmm.
expected, especially around that time when I got married and whatnot, and we bought the house, and all of
Yeah.
that. So anyway, I had to kind of go over a bump there in the road, and once all of that was settled, we got pregnant and welcomed our daughter here. She's always lived in this house, and so
Hmm.
life has been uh, pretty steady for her,
Yeah.
which I really think is important for a child. I
Hmm.
don't feel like my life has been like that, but I think for her it has, or I hope that for her it has. We have had to travel, and so I'm sure she has a lot more active of a life than other kids her age. But overall, I think she has had quite a peaceful life, or we try.
Yeah. And I appreciate you speaking to that layer, right? Of on one hand, you feeling like there is a fair amount of uncertainty and stability that you're managing, but at the same time, making sure that as a provider, you are fostering an environment where she feels more stable throughout.
Hmm.
And that is a massive undertaking. So I know that we are getting close to time. And so I wanted to ask you, what do you feel has supported you through this process the most?
Yeah, so going back to childhood, growing up in a good family with good friends, with a good social support network, whether it was school, church that I went to when I was young, um, even the college experience in Argentina, the undergrad. All of those were really positive experiences. Uh,
Hmm.
so so yeah, those are the things that remind me who I am and what I'm worth.
Hmm. Thank you. And my last question, this one is coming. If you were to meet the Florencia who was about to move to Michigan for her graduate studies, thinking that she was only going to be there for 2 years, what would you like her to know?
You are going to lose some things along the way, and you're going to gain others. You're doing this for opportunity to keep
Hmm.
your options open. And you may find one day that there's opportunity in moving back or in moving elsewhere one day. So don't burn any bridges.
Hmm.
Continue to foster as much as you can those relationships abroad and around you, wherever you are. And And yeah, and keep your mind open.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and for your time today, Florencia.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That is the end of today's episode. Thank you for listening to Lucky to Be Here. I am your host, Dr. Analia Gomez Vidal. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening and leave us your review. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/luckytobehere to continue our conversation and to get my reflections and resources for career development too. See you next time.